Hello, hello, and welcome to my Sunday Thought. I skipped last Sunday because the holiday season is so intense. But last Sunday I wanted to talk to you about Hanukkah, and now it's the day after Christmas, and I'm still going to talk to you about Hanukkah. Those of you who don't know what Hanukkah is, it's called the Festival of Lights, and we celebrate because the Maccabees defeated the Syrians who were about to abolish the temple. And when they saved the temple, there was only enough oil in the eternal light, the light that must not go out. That is the tradition of the Jewish religion, is that light in every synagogue has to remain alive, or it is no longer holy. And there was only enough oil for one day, and by some miracle, after the Maccabees saved us from the Syrians demolishing the temple, the synagogue, same thing. It lasted for 8 days. And so the Jews celebrate 8 days in the Festival of Light, and it's very much like Christmas in that the children get gifts every single night, and it's for children it's a marvelous holiday. The definition of a Jewish holiday is they hated us. We fought them. We won. Let's eat. And so after every meal and every holiday, and to welcome the holiday and to say goodbye to the holiday, we eat. We eat. And Hanukkah is one of the biggest eating feasts because it never stops. It's eight feasts. And they all have to be dairy. So there are things like Blintzes. If you don't know what Blintzes are, you're going to find out. Latkes, which are potato pancakes. Fish meals like gefilte fish, which is to me abhorrent. And let me think. Luction of noodle puddings, potato puddings, that kind of thing. And it takes a lot to think of 8 different meals for a large family that's interesting enough for them to eat for 8 days when you can't have any meat. It's all milk. But my mother was up to the challenge, and my mother loved Hanukkah because my mother, even when she cooked for the 4 of us, she cooked as if it was for an army. So for as long as I can remember, we always had the Hanukkah meals at our house. And my mother would feed us a magnificent meal the first night. After that, every single meal was exactly the same thing, but disguised, because my mother hated leftovers. So she would cream the noodles, she would add lentils to the noodles or green peppers. She would put a little sauce in the leftovers. If there were leftover potato pancakes, she'd chop them up, and she added things like potato chips on top. It was by the 8th meal, it was very dangerous to eat at our house because some of that stuff had been around for 8 days and had been absolutely mutilated with my mother's creativity. However, but we did always eat at our house, and our house had a huge living room. The living room was as big as a bowling alley, and the people that used to come were always my mother, my father, my sister, and I. My Aunt Tick, her 3 children, her dog Dell and her canary, and my Aunt Hazel, her 2 children, her dog Sparky, and Uncle Jack. And they were always there. Sometimes my mother's brother would come. The 3 sisters didn't like the brother because he got a room of his own, and they had to all share a room. And they never, for the 70 or 80 years they were alive, they never forgave him for that. So sometimes my Uncle Charlie and Aunt Regine would come over, but mostly it was just the 3 sisters. And then there was a baby sister, my Aunt Seal, but nobody thought much of her, so she never got to come to the dinners. And she couldn't drive, so she couldn't get there. As I say, it was always at my mother's house, but then right after the war, there was dissension in the ranks. The 2 sisters, my mother's 2 younger sisters, Aunt Hazel and Aunt Tick, had become fairly affluent, and had lovely homes. And they were also very good cooks. And they were also getting tired of my mother's leftovers for the 7 remaining nights after that first night. So my Aunt Hazel said, this was right after the war, it must have been 1945, I think, 45, 46. My Aunt Hazel said to my mother, for Hanukkah this year, let's all come to my house. And my mother said, no, you can't. Your living room is too small. And she said, no, we have additions for the table. We can make the table bigger and we'll put it, we'll stretch it out. We can get everybody at the table. And besides, I have a television set and we can all watch Betty Hutton on the Ed Sullivan Show. And my mother said, Hazel, you can't watch television on Hanukkah. You have to contemplate the miracle of the Maccabees. What would the rabbis say? And my aunt said, well, we won't invite him. And my mother said, I already did. So that settles it. We'll have it at my house. And my Aunt Tick said, no. We just have a brand new house, brand new beautiful dining room. We can have it at my house. And my mother said, no, you can't make blintzes. And my aunt said, yes, I can. I've been practicing. And my mother said, Tick, you can't make a waffle. So my father, who was the mediator of this group, said, no, girls, let's stop this bickering. We'll settle this by having a contest. The person that can make the most Blintz pancakes out of a cup of batter can have all 8 dinners at her house. My mother was thrilled. She said, absolutely, let's do it. Now let me explain why. My mother was, the secret of a good Blintz, if you don't know what it is like a little Jewish cheesecake. It's a crepe. It's a pancake filled with cottage cheese and vanilla and sugar, and then you put sour cream on top, and it is divine. If you've never tasted one, you must contact me, and I'll invite you over and make Blintzes for you. They're marvelous. They're a production, but they're absolutely marvelous. The secret of a good Blintz is, according to my mother, the pan. My mother had a pan that she never washed. It was so thin. I don't know what it was made of. I'm going to guess aluminum, but it was so thin, which meant that it got very, very hot. And she never washed it. She greased it, and she wiped it out with a paper towel after she was finished making these pancakes. And she insisted that was the secret of her success. Now, the sign of a good Blintz, as you know, the sign of a good gravy is no lumps. But the sign of a good Blintz is how thin that pancake is. And my mother was known to get, let me think, 32 pancakes out of 1 cup of batter. The recipe says you'll get 12. You'll get 12. So my aunt said, okay, let's have the contest at my house. And my mother said, no, you have to have it at my house because it's a gas stove. You have to have a gas stove because you can control the heat. An electric stove, you turn off the heat and it's still warm. You have to be able to control the heat. And besides, said my mother, I have the pan. Okay, said my Aunt Hazel, we'll do it at your house, but I'm going to make my own batter. And Aunt Tick said, I'm going to bring my own pan. So that Friday night, we all gathered at my house, the 3 sisters wearing their little flowered aprons and always high-heeled shoes, and their hair done on Thursday, so they were coiffed in their little aprons. They each brought a pan, and they each brought a cup of batter. The tasting committee was my Uncle Harry and Uncle Jack and Daddy, my sister, my cousin Jessica, Ricky, Penny, Friedel, and Lois, Dell, I think Aunt Tick had Dell by that time, and the Canary. And we were all there ready to taste these pancakes as soon as they were made, because Jewish people do not throw out food. Once they made all the pancakes, they had to fill them and serve them to us afterwards, which was great. So my Aunt Tick, my father said, okay, Tick, you're the first one. And Aunt Tick, and she was my favorite. She was absolutely my favorite. She was really tiny. She had little freckles, and she had very, very curly hair, and she was very intense and very intelligent, and I adored her. And she squared her shoulders, and she walked to the stove with her cup of batter and her little pan. Now, the secret, by the way, of the pan, as I said to you, is you never wash it. So my mother was there with her pan, which was stinking up the whole kitchen because it smelled so bad. So my aunt got up there with her pan and the batter, and she greased the pan and began to flip the pancakes. And she flipped them and flipped them and flipped them, and the pancakes flew through the air like feathers. And when she was all done, we counted 30 pancakes. too short of my mother's record. My mother's record was 32. I'll start polishing the silver, said Uncle Harry. You made it. And my Aunt Hazel said, just a minute, just a minute. I wasn't ping-pong champion of Warren High School for nothing, you know. And she got up there. She was very feisty, very, very positive little lady. And she got up with her pan and her cup of batter. She started, greased the pan, and the pancakes flew like feathers. And when it was all done, we counted 30. Still too short of my mother's record. And Aunt Hazel said to Aunt Tick, okay, you take the first 4 nights and I'll take the last 4. And my mother said, just a minute. You haven't given me my chance. And everybody stood back. And a hush came over the crowd. My mother walked to the stove like the champion that she was, with her battered, stinkin' pan and 1 cup of batter. She nodded, greased the pan, and I have never seen a flurry of pancakes flying through the air as fast as my mother's production. The pancakes flew to the chandelier. They flew on top of the dog. There were several in the dining room. There were several on the kitchen floor. There were 3 under the kitchen table. There was 2 on top of my head. 2 managed to fly into the bathroom, but did not land in the toilet. And we all started counting. I've got 45, said Uncle Harry. Oh, but you didn't see the 5 in the dining room. And what about the 2 that the dog ate, said Jessica. And there's a whole bunch of them there in the living room. Look at that. Ah, said Friedel, there are 10 in the fireplace. Look at that. Look at that. 3 flew out the window there on top of the Buick. Well, when we got all done, the total number was 65. My mother smiled, and we had Hanukkah at her house every year and every night after that. My mother was the champion Blintz maker. Flash ahead several years, and I married, which is a surprise to everyone. I married, and I decided that at Hanukkah I would make Blintzes. And I was convinced that I could do as good a job as my mother because I went to college. I could read a recipe, and I had a lovely brand new pan, which of course was the worst thing I could have. And I tried to 1 cup of batter. I said to my husband, I can do this. I'm going to get 65 pancakes out of this batter. Well, I ended up with 8. They were so thick that you couldn't chew them unless you had brand new dentures. And I was thinking of selling my technique to Goodyear tires. They could use it to patch up flat tires. And I called my mother, as all failed young cooks do. And I said to my mother, Mother, how did you manage to get 65 pancakes out of that 1 cup of batter? And my mother said, well, how did the Maccabees get that light to burn for 8 nights? God knows, I said. Exactly, said my mother. And thank you very much for joining me for my thoughts. Remember that if you didn't get everyone their Christmas present and you're late, you can order The Last Laugh at Amazon, and they will love it, and it will bring a smile to their faces. And thank you so much for joining me in my Sunday thought.